Hello, you golfing legends, and welcome back to another episode of the original Off Course. I'm your host, Dan Edwards, and joining me this week for, I believe, the second time on the show is Mr. Terry Koehler of Edison Golf fame, among other things, really, but Edison at the time. Terry, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me, Dan. It's always fun to get with you guys, and I know you'll always have some good questions. And let's go have some fun.
Absolutely. First of all, how are things going? How is Edison Golf doing right now?
We're doing very well. The season's well underway now, and we continue to win converts every week as people hear what we have to say about wedges and how their tour design wedges are holding them back. And we have people continue to take us up on our 100% risk-free trial, and they find out, wow, this really is different. And we talk a lot about the Edison difference and the Edison advantage, and because it's like taking your game from a pure muscle back blade to a more gamer proven iron. You get to see great results, and we continue to earn rave reviews from the people that give us a shot.
Well, that's good. I mean, it's one thing to get your name out there. It's another thing to get your name out there with the reality that it actually does help the golfer. And I want to challenge you a little bit on that because I saw some social media discussion over the last week. It was Mr. Ben Coles, his greenside flub, if you will. And you guys had a little bit of fun saying maybe if he had an Edison in the bag, it might have gotten the job done. So what exactly are you talking about there?
Well, and that video really took me off guard because I don't know that I've ever really seen that clear of an illustration of what happens on a wedge shot when you hit it off center. And I really feel for the guy, but he was greenside on the 18th hole. The ball was quite obviously perched up in the rough. He needed about a 30 to 35 foot carry to get it on the green and give himself a par putt. And the network that was televising did a great job of going in and really slowing down what happened at impact. And you can clearly see that he made contact way out on the toe. And even on a shot that was only 30 or 35 feet, you can see this club head just wobble and recoil. You can see the shaft do this because that ball was hit so far out on the toe. And I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure out if that club head recoils, it soaked up a bunch of energy of that shot that did not transfer to the ball. And unfortunately for him, the ball carried over the bunker, but not to the green. It's in the deep rough again, and he chipped up and missed his par putt. But that's the shot that I've been working my whole life to try to say, how can I get you more efficient impact, a better smash factor when you do hit it out on the toe? Because even the tour player of his skill level, I mean, he's good enough to be in the hunt on a PGA event. So that week, he's the first or second best golfer in the world. And even he was victimized by the fact that there's no mass up there on that golf club. And so, again, you go back and look at it, the club head recoils from that off-center impact, which is what happens on any shot with an off-center impact. But I was kind of blown away, really, that it was that pronounced on a shot of that short distance.
So when it comes to shots higher on the head, I mean, I'll admit when I hit a shot around the green, it's always fascinating to me to see where the contact result came from, or even I'll give you a mid iron in the longer rough. It's like, man, I hit that pretty good, but then you look down and the contact is way up on the head, so inevitably you're losing a little bit of that distance. So walk through that with me because there's a lot of mass that's been redistributed or distributed around the head on the Edison wedge. We're so used to seeing that set all around the base of the club. Usually the feedback is like, let's get it all low and separated from heel to toe, but you're bringing that back up.
Well, if you go to the history of the sand wedge, Dan, and Gene Sarazen is generally credited with inventing that golf club and the explosion technique that went along with it. And his premise was very simple. At the time, irons, whether it was a niblick or a mashie or whatever, it was pretty much a thin slab of metal with a long hosel with a very narrow sole. And so Bobby Jones and those guys, they all learned how to pick the ball out of bunkers because that's how you had to play a bunker shot. You had to be super precise in picking the ball out. Well, Sarazen was flying, as the story goes, was flying in an airplane and watched the pilot put the flaps up to make the airplane go up. And he had this idea of what if I welded a bunch of material on the bottom of a niblick so that niblick would come up out of the sand. And that was kind of where the original sand wedge was created in the 30s. And he created the explosion technique along with it, obviously, which immediately became, wow, this is a game changer. Bunkers are not hazards anymore like they used to be, because in early golf course architecture, man, that was a brutally difficult shot to be in a bunker and trying to pick the ball out with this niblick. So through the 40s, everybody put a sand wedge in their bag, and into the 50s and 60s, and some of them learned that with that heavy sole, this is a pretty good club for certain shots around the greens. As Ben Hogan very clearly stated, for certain shots around the greens, that sand wedge is viable. However, they also mostly pitched the ball with their pitching wedge, which was a 51 or 2 degree golf club back then. So if you look at the advent, wedges, pretty much the modern wedge was created in the mid 70s with the Wilson, and then Roger Cleveland kind of made wedges a thing with Cleveland golf in the mid 80s. And wedges really haven't changed since then, because the weight is on the bottom and it's all about the sole performance. But anything hit high in the face, as we all know, leaves a lot to be desired. So what I did essentially in 1990 was patented the Koehler sole, which puts 2 bounce angles in the bottom so that I can create versatility. But the efficiency of that sole allowed me to dramatically thicken the top half of the blade. So there's more oomph behind that golf ball. There's more thickness behind that mid face or high face impact. And as I've studied wedges for these last 30 plus years, I look at amateur golfers, our listeners today. Most of them, if they look at their wedges, they're going to see an impact pattern higher in the face than what a tour player's wedge would illustrate. And that means that the club has to be designed for that recreational golfer with a different mass distribution than for the tour player. It's a big story. It's very simple. I'm going to put more thickness behind your miss hit and your dead center face hit, and that's going to give you better smash factor and better ball speed coming off the club.
Well, it's a simple concept in design for sure. I mean, it's not anything insane to look at. Like you'd suggest that sometimes someone brings something out that is just wild and it's really hard to wrap your head around. But what I think is curious about what you're doing is you're effectively swimming uphill with a lot of what wedge design would suggest. And I'm wondering, is there a challenge to get people over that hump to say, look, this isn't the traditional logic, it's what you actually need, just because what is doesn't necessarily apply here for what is best for you? Is that a challenging discussion to have with golfers?
I think anytime you take on the status quo, Dan, it's challenging. I've been in this business 40 plus years, and when that ping answer came out, it sure didn't look like that 80 at 02 and that bullseye and the Odie Chrisman mallets that dominated of the day. But dang, it sure worked. And so that ugly look was pretty easy to get used to. And the same with the metalwood. We were all playing persimmon, and here comes this crazy idea of a metalwood that's small, and but until you hit one, you realize, holy cow, this is the real deal. Big Bertha, the same way. Cavity back irons. The Ping eye did not look like a Wilson staff blade, by any means. And throughout history, technology in golf equipment is going to require us to get used to looking at something a little different. And in the case of the Edison wedges, when you put it down behind the ball, it's as conventional looking as any wedge you've ever put in your hand. I mean, every wedge has its nuances of teardrop shape and top line and leading edge, but this is a super clean look. But when you look at the back of this golf club, in a display rack or in your bag or in our website, it doesn't look like any wedge out there. It's just an iron. This is just a golf club designed to optimize performance at 45, 48, 52, 57 degrees. And every golf club is designed with a set of goals. A driver is not optimized to chip the ball with. It's optimized to hit a ball off of a tee. A fairway wood is not optimized to be hit off of a tee. It's optimized to be hit off the turf. A 4-iron and a 7-iron have very different jobs that they have to do in our bag, as does our 9-iron and our approach wedge and our lob wedges. And all I did is I said, what's the right way to optimize performance on a 49-degree golf club or a 54-degree golf club or a 58-degree golf club? Because I'm putting the blinders on going, I'm going to make a wedge of 57 to 59 degrees. What makes that work better than say a golf club of 29 degrees, which has a 6 or a 7 on the bottom. And so, every golf club in our bag is engineered for a specific set of performance parameters. And the story I preach forever is your tour design wedges, and granted, Bob Oakey, Aaron Dill at Titleist are brilliant at what they do. The people at Callaway TaylorMade are brilliant at what they do, but they're locked into the tour player because they believe every golfer will play what the tour player plays. But we know that's not true. The tour player isn't playing A-flex and R-flex shafts, and the tour player isn't playing the wide variety of cavity back irons and game improvement irons, and the tour player isn't playing hybrids all the way up to the 5-iron. So you need to look at your bag and go, where are my needs? What area can I improve performance? And maybe I need to get away from the same wedges I played for the last 30 years with different graphics and different branding. So.
Well, let me add just a little bit of a visual here because it tends to help for folks. There's a lot of truth. It is a very normal looking product in most angles you can present. And I think that's a great thing. Where I would start to challenge whether the consistency is you start to work into this single sole logic. It is the Koehler sole, which is the multiple sole style. But one of the things about swinging uphill with the wedge game right now is there's such a grind story that's going on in the traditional wedge discussion. What grind must you use? What bounce must you use? Well, you have isolated to very particular setups for golfers, and I'd love for you to expand on that part of it too. What is it like when people come and say, well, I love the C grind or the L grind or the M grind, and you just say you need the Koehler sole or the Koehler sole is what you need?
Well, I've always the proliferation of grinds on the marketplace is something I find fascinating, actually, because most of these grinds have been developed by working with a particular tour player who I can feel the heel in the turf a little better. I can feel this. These guys can feel things in a golf club. Even the most advanced amateur golfer would have a hard time feeling. And, these grinds, and I'd be a little cynical here, but, if I have 8 lofts and 1 shaft, I can get maybe 2 or 3 deep in the retail store. But if I have 8 lofts and 6 grinds in 1 shaft, I can get a lot deeper spread in the retail store. And that, that mainstream display in the retail store is broad and confusing. And they talk about bounce fitting. What really challenges me is people think they can bounce fit indoors off of a mat. And that's just the most absurd concept there is to me, because there's no turf interaction. But even to the concept of bounce fitting in general, we all have a tendency. We're a little steeper, we're a little shallower. Our course tends to be a little firmer. Our golf course tends to be a little soft. But unless you're playing one of the top few hundred clubs in the country that has super consistent turf conditions and wonderfully manicured bunkers, you don't know what that golf course is going to throw at you. The rank and file listener here does not know what their next wedge lie is going to look like. I know my next wedge shot's going to be my approach on our first hole. It's a sharp par 4, but I can have a tight lie on almost bare ground. I can be in the rough. I can be in the fairway bunker. I can be in the fairway with a close lie. I can be in the fairway on Thursday when I got 3 days of growth on the fairway, so the ball's perched up a little more. I don't know what that lie is going to look like exactly. So how am I going to pick a bounce that's going to be right for that shot? I don't even know what it's going to be. And then, so then I hit it in the bunker on the second hole. But if I'm on the left side of the bunker, I've got pretty wet packed sand. But if I'm up higher on the right side of the bunker, our sand is pretty fluffy. Same bunker. I don't know what that sand is going to be. I don't know what that next shot. And my goal that I've been chasing with this sole design for over 30 years since I first engineered it in 1990 is how can I create a sole that's really good at almost everything, pretty good at everything else, and a rare lie that it's going to give you a handicap. And every specialized sole design is going to be really good at a narrow range of things, kind of good at maybe a little outside that range. It's going to be really negligent, really deficient on certain other. I mean, if you got a high bounce sand wedge in your bag and you go play somewhere it's got firm, tight bunkers, you're kind of messed up. And, The tour player, he would go into the van and get new wedges for free that fit that particular course that day. I mean, like Pinehurst is notably tight. They're talking about a possible chance of rain Thursday and Friday. If that course gets soft, every one of those guys is going to go to the trailers and get some wedges that have a little more bounce in it. The rest of us, we spend $500, $600, $800 on a set of wedges, and I'm gonna play them for 2 or 3 years. Everywhere I go, every shot I hit, and my goal is how can I give you a broader spectrum of performance out of that investment you made? And so that's really what the sole is about. It's got a high bounce in the front of the sole, so it won't dig in a tight lie situation. It's got a lower bounce in the back part of the sole, so you can hit those shots cleanly off the turf. And the two angles are going to work together if you're in softer turf or if you're in a softer bunker. And like any wedge, when you lay the club open, you're going to increase both bounce angles. You're going to increase the bounce characteristics of the golf club. There's no sole that is great everywhere. The hardest shot in all of golf is tight, wet turf. It's soft, but it's tight. That's a really difficult shot. And the really soft, fluffy bunker, which is why you don't see soft, fluffy bunkers on the PGA Tour, because it's brutally hard to get the ball to come out like you want when the sand won't reject that golf club.
So is part of the Edison selling point that you can quite literally take them anywhere to any golf course and have some level of success? I mean, we've had conversations on the show plenty of times in the past about changing clubs or changing what fits you based on the locations you traditionally would play in. That I firmly believe that playing in Ohio versus playing in Texas versus playing in Florida would require 3 fairly significant fitting differences from a wedge perspective in those areas. Are you saying that this is much easier to have more of a level playing field and be more consistent regardless of where you play?
Well, that's certainly my goal, Dan. I mean, we've got wedges in play in every state in the United States and across the world, Asia, Australia, Europe. And again, like you say, turf conditions can change dramatically. And if you play, in softer turf conditions as a general rule, you can have wedges with a little more bounce, but then that same guy, is going to take a trip to Florida and he's going to or Arizona, going to encounter some much tighter turf. And I know you have golfers, the big forums, we all have golfers that are, club junkies. I mean, I love them. You wouldn't believe how many golf clubs I have, but, and maybe they have 3 or 4 sets of wedges. They're willing to make that, $2,000 investment to have wedges to travel with. But, the rank and file golfer, I mean, golf clubs are a major expenditure and they're a major investment today. And, I got one driver that's going to travel with me everywhere. I got one set of irons going to travel with me everywhere, and probably going to have one set of wedges that travel with me everywhere. So, my goal has always been to pursue as broad a range of versatility as I possibly can. And I'm a big proponent of shallow divots. I don't care who you are, where you play, what kind of golfer you are. It's easier on your hands and wrists. And if you're a shallow divot taker, if the ground is real soft versus real firm, you're going to be less affected. That gets in more into technique, whatever. But, I've got a young assistant pro here at our club that's early and he's working on his PGA program, and I'm spending time with him telling him, you've got to learn how to take shallower divots in this tight turf, because the turf conditions have less impact on the outcome of the shot that way. But that's another whole topic.
Well, let's add another part of the discussion about your wedges. I really thought this show would be more about the application of a wedge and, celebrating what we've seen. But I'll tell you what, there's a lot of interesting things going on that I think are worth people at least reviewing, taking into consideration. And one of those things that really caught my eye, Terry, was the depth of the experience in between your mill lines. It looks to me like a diamond pattern. You've called it your X pattern. What I see is a lot of interaction that could potentially support spin. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. I think grooves are overrated in the spin conversation. If I look at we did some testing with the independent test facility on the Edison wedges, and we sent them a wedge with a totally smooth milled face, no texture, no grooves, no anything. And then, our production wedge, which, nobody has a competitive advantage in grooves. I mean, this is what golfers maybe don't understand. The USGA regulates groove geometry to the nth degree. And they haven't changed that ruling since 2010, which went into effect in 2011. And we as manufacturers cannot do one thing by the rules of golf to a wedge face today that we couldn't do 14 years ago. What has improved is our machining techniques and tolerances so we can hold those USGA guidelines a little tighter. But in our testing on a dry ball, our wedge only lost 15% spin without any grooves at all on the face. Without any grooves at all. Now, that's on a dry ball. The grooves on the wedge, the primary purpose of the grooves on any club face is to channel away moisture and debris so you can get the ball on the face of the golf club where you can have a coefficient of friction. It's exactly the purpose of the tread on your tires on your car. If you drove on a perfectly dry highway all the time, a perfectly slick tire would give you maximum traction because all that tire is on the road. That's why you see, dragsters and Indy tires. They don't have any tread on them unless it starts raining, and then they go swap tires because they got to have tread to channel away the moisture. But on a dry track, on a dry golf ball, however, a dry golf ball is not golf. We're always going to get some grass in between the ball and the face, and that's where the grooves are designed to channel that away. And but what really makes spin happen in any golf club is the distribution of mass and what we call gear effect. So if you look at drivers, high launch and low spin is the holy grail of distance, we've learned, right? And so they're getting that by putting as much mass as low in the driver head as possibly can. Carbon crowns, carbon faces, thin titanium faces. Let's get as much of the mass down and back as we possibly can that launches the ball high and minimal spin. Well, where is all the mass of the conventional wedge? Go look at a rack of them in the store, and all the mass is on the bottom of the golf club. So by the laws of golf ball performance, a wedge, forget loft, a wedge wants to launch the ball high with no spin. Well, we want it launching low with lots of spin. So the tour players learn to hit it down on the third and fourth groove, so he's got more of that club head above the point of impact. So the ball is launching, in that penetrating trajectory with lots of spin that we all, ooh and ah over. And the recreational golfer has not perfected that. In the wedges I examined, they're making impact more up around the fifth or sixth groove on their best shots. And they've got another 20% of that club head mass below the ball, which means it's going to want to launch high with low spin. I've seen 70,000 wedge fitting profiles since my day at Eidolon and Score and through Ben Hogan and now to Edison. And 80% of golfers, regardless of handicap, say I hit my wedges too high, I don't spin the ball as much as I'd like, and my distance control is lousy. And my answer is the reason you don't hit your driver as far is because that old Persimmon driver is just not optimized. Okay, it's the same thing. That old tour design wedge is not optimized for low launch, consistent distance, and high spin. I mean, it's the laws of golf club physics. I mean, the ball is going to react to that golf club. Where is the mass in relation to where the point of impact was? What was the lofted impact? What was the angle of attack? I can't control the angle of attack, and I can't control where you hit it on the face, but I can design a golf club that gives you better performance kind of all over the face.
So the hitting system that has now not the hitting system, the fitting systems that are now in place with golf clubs has become pretty pronounced in at least the golfer that is even remotely interested in performance as it relates to their game. I know there's still a little bit of that marketing component that exists, but there seems to be a lot more validation nowadays. And I think that's good for a product like yours, and especially with the risk-free trial that exists. But I want to add to that, and I'm curious from your perspective, because it doesn't technically involve your product, even though it's interacting with it. Where do you stand on how critical a ball fitting is for golfers?
a ball fitting,
Yes.
I haven't got a lot of deep experience in that. All right. But, the golf ball is the only piece of equipment that's in play on every shot, from drive to putt, your short greenside pitches. What I observe in golfers is they don't get enough spin around the greens to control the ball to leave themselves good par putts and bogey putts. And the rank and file golfer we're talking about, and probably your listener and everybody's listener, is trying to break 90 or 80, maybe 100. Very few have the daily goal of breaking par. I mean, that's a tiny piece of the golf population. And how you perform inside 100 yards around the greens with your short par fours, your approach shots on par fives, and your saves when you miss a green, that's going to determine your score for the day for the most part. If you're having a bad ball striking day, either go to the range or get a lesson or just shake it off and play again tomorrow. But your consistency in getting the ball to be close enough to the hole to have a chance to make that putt when you're inside 100 yards or so is going to determine your ability to break 90 or 80 or par or 100. And I'm a big proponent of play a spinny golf ball. Play a ball that inside 30 or 40 yards lets you throw darts at the flag, lets you control the spin, and so that you can hit it on the green and make it stop, give yourself a putt. I've always said that when you have a wedge in your hand for the second or third consecutive shot, this hole's pretty much gotten away from you. When you put a wedge in your hand, your next shot should be a putt just as often as you possibly can make that happen. So, and that's where a spinny golf ball comes in. I don't think anybody makes a bad golf ball out there. The top 10 or 15 brands. I mean, the technology in balls is so good. But I also believe, and I've been blessed to maintain a low single-digit handicap into my 70s. Even I have a difficult time telling a difference between balls in the same category. A tour-type spinny golf ball or a distance ball. I can tell the difference between those. But, realistically, I look at the golf ball as a somewhat of a commodity. But to the ball fitting, I think you have to look at that ball fitting is, are you fitting me for greenside spin and ball control? Or are you fitting me for what goes further? Because I think most amateur golfers are going to get pretty much the same distance out of any top grade golf ball. That's just my opinion.
Tell me more about the risk-free trial. Why is that such an interesting and most valuable component of what you're trying to accomplish there?
Well, I believe that, first of all, you cannot buy wedges indoors off of a mat. We talked about fitting. I don't think you can get a good fitting off of a mat and a wedge. And, I can fit a driver indoors. I'm launching off 2-inch tee. I can buy it by the numbers, and I buy that. I'm not so sure even in iron fitting. I'm a little bit of a skeptic on that because you're fitting me for a 7-iron, a 28 to 30 degree golf club. And I'm supposed to believe that the 50-degree club that looks like that is going to also perform for me, but you don't have one for me to hit. And I was in a conversation the other day, and I said, do you realize that your approach wedge is further from your 7-iron than your driver is in loft? Nobody in the history of the world has ever said, I love my 7-iron. Can you make me a driver just like it? In fact, I'm going to have 4 completely different club head designs for my 7-iron and my driver. I'm going to have an iron design and probably a hybrid and then a fairway wood and then a driver. Because that's how the manufacturers are optimizing performance in those various ranges of loft. But then you're telling me you can take technology and a 28-degree club and apply it at 35, 42, 47, and 51 and give me consistent performance? I don't buy that. So back to your question about our trial, the only way to evaluate whether any wedge is going to be what you want is to put it on the golf course. 2 or 3, 4 rounds of golf, hit lots of different shots that you face every day, see how that sole performs out of the bunker, out of the turf, see what the ball flight looks like, see what the spin looks like. Forget the numbers. What are you observing? Did you like what that wedge did for you? You're going to experience some mishits. Did you get away with those mishits a little bit? And that's why we offer 100% risk-free trial. We're not going to send you some generic demo. We're so confident what we do. We'll build you a golf club, the shaft you want, the loft you want, length specification, lie specification. If you want some tape under the grip, all we ask is you stay with our standard components. We don't Can't do that on every shaft in the market because we haven't tested every shaft in the market. But if you give us a fair trial with a shaft that's going to fit you and the specs, and go hit the shots, we get 1.5% of them back. I mean, nobody ever made a golf club everybody liked, not even the Ping Answer, right? So, but we'll take our chances because this is a different golf club. It requires experience. It requires you to hit those little chip shots and pitch shots and mid-range shots and full swings and bunkers and tight lies. And you have to put a wedge through a lot more testing than you do a 7-iron or a driver.
So that's once again a very different avenue to go that I think a lot of fitting is today. And I appreciate what you're saying, Terry, because there's a level of necessity that requires you to be able to hit the shots you're comfortable with, regardless of what the performance or the numbers say. We always hear about honeymoon phases where a product is unbelievable on the range, and the second you put it in play, it either performs for a week, it performs for a day, it performs for a month, or it performs for forever. And that honeymoon phase is a terrifying thing in something like a wedge where you hit it 4 or 5 times and you hit it on the nuts on the range, and it's like, all right, this wedge is great, but you're ignoring the other 99% of shots you have to hit, as Mr. Cole saw this past week. That'll cause a little bit of concern whether you got the right product in your hands. The number you said, did you say 1.5%? That's it? They come back?
We get about, I mean, we're not in the miracles business. We've had people return and going, well, I chunked everything. Well, the wedge can't do that. The wedge cannot make that happen. I'm sorry, but, you sculled everything or chunked everything. And again, nobody's ever made a golf club that everybody likes. I mean, it's never happened in the history of golf. And so, what we have here is you're going to put this wedge through a huge variety of shots, and and it's got to perform everywhere. So we just don't get many back. On the other hand, our average owner's got a bag full of Edisons because they hit one, they try it out, and they go, wow, this is the real deal. And I'm very proud of the fact that what we're doing, Dan, is the real deal. Excuse me just a minute. I got to plug the computer in here.
That's all right. Well, I'll ask a counter question if you can still hear me.
Yeah.
You mentioned a bag full of them, and prior to our show, I went on to see what people are saying. It's nice that you have that information on your page from people who give their feedback straight onto the Edison Wedges web homepage, or a homepage, the product page. But one of the guys said, yeah, I got another wedge that I fit into my 9-iron slot, that now I have all these wedges in the bag. So clearly they're waiting for you guys to sell a 7-iron or a 6-iron so they can keep stacking the bag full of wedges. But are you getting a lot of that where guys will start with maybe a 58 or a 57 and really start to let it trickle down into the rest of their setup?
We do. Probably the majority of our sales on any given week or month, we have a mix of people trying this for the first time. And you're right. You'll typically see people will try a wedge to where they feel like they need the most help. Maybe it's in their gap wedge play. Maybe it's in their 57, 59 degree play. We've had some people say, I struggle with my pitching wedge, and people will start out with a 45 or 47. And then when they see this kind of performance, they tend to fill in the set. It wasn't long after the first wedge, people started saying, I love these. When are you going to do irons? And, that happened to us at Score. And we took lofts all the way down to 41. And I was in another conversation about, what is a wedge anyway? I mean, we've got these 45 degree clubs in our bag, now some 43s and 41s that have a P on the bottom, but that's not a true wedge. You cannot pitch the ball with a 45 degree golf club. I mean, we make them and we call them Edison wedges, but when I was growing up and playing golf in the 60s, 70s, that 45 degree club had an 8 on the bottom of it. Okay. Well, by putting a P on the bottom of it, I didn't change the performance of that golf club. I just changed the nomenclature. And, putting a Mercedes hood ornament on my, my cheap car is not going to make it a Mercedes, right? And So clubs numbers have just become names anymore, and but the fact is, you need some gapping to get you through the scoring zone. You can call them wedges, whatever. I do think, as I mentioned earlier, taking your 7-iron design all the way through your high loft golf clubs, I think is not the right thing to do for optimized scoring. No more than I think you should be playing tour design wedges if you're a 6 or 16 handicap. You don't have those kind of skills, and you don't play those kind of golf courses. And so I think you have to look at what are your real world conditions. But one of the things in the wedge category, and I'm kind of jumping off the question, is nobody talks about shafts and wedges. Here's 200 wedges in a retail display with all these different lofts and bounce angles, and they all basically have the same shaft. We do probably 40% of our production in graphite. We're a KBS company. We use KBS Tours, our standard steel, 3 weights and flexes. We do KBS PGI graphite, 6 weights and flexes. It is hugely important to have your wedge shafts blended seamlessly to what's in your irons. That's the feel and the weight and the balance you're used to. And another whole topic, but the wedge category, I think, gets short shrift a lot of times because the conversation, as you alluded to earlier, is about grinds or about grooves. And the club head design itself is just as important in a wedge as it is in a driver or a 7-iron.
Now, I know you said you were jumping off topic a little bit about it, but I think it's worth hearing more from your perspective. It's clear that you're willing to accommodate the golfer based on what shaft they prefer. But in a lot of cases, it seems that the stock stiff or stock wedge W shaft is exactly what people are thinking they need. So once again, I'd ask that question. What makes you so invested in that, and how do you convince people to make a selection rather than just say, what's your stock?
Well, one of the things we do is we have on our website what we call Wedge Fit. It's a short range analysis, and we encourage people to go through that because it gives you a look at your scoring range performance and lets us see what's in your bag so that we can make a recommendation for you. If you've been custom fitted for irons and you're playing a 60 gram, soft R flex graphite shaft, the last thing in the world you need is a 40 or 50 gram disconnect and a 20 or 30 CPM disconnect, to how your gap wedge is going to perform compared to your set matching P club. So the shaft is the engine of the golf club, as we saw when go back to that video of Ben Coles. And we saw in that video, even with the stiff steel shaft, that shaft did some wobbling when he hit that ball off center. But what really, where the shaft performance comes in so importantly is because it gives you that feel transition. You take your rangefinder, get out of the cart, you got a P club and your gap wedge in your hand, you walk over to where your ball is. If these two clubs are 40 grams in different weight, 40 cycles different in shaft flex, you're not going to be able to make the same swing with those golf clubs. Your body can't do that. 40 grams in a golf club is a lot. 15 grams is a lot. So we believe very big in shaft fitting, and then get the line go right. If you've got those wedges are too upright, you're gonna stick the heel in the ground around the greens. If they're too flat, you're going to be sticking the toe in the ground. If the grip size isn't right, you're going to be uncomfortable in your hands. If the length isn't right, all of those things, the custom fitting thing has been a great boon to iron fitting and probably to driver fitting, but it's not perfect because it's in this controlled environment of an indoor fitting bay. But in the wedge category, my thing is, if you're comfortable with your irons and you trust the fit, let's blend your wedges to them. And because you typically wouldn't start fitting your whole bag out by fitting the wedge shaft. And the wedge shaft is asked to do a lot of things. In the course or around the golf, you may hit 3 7-iron shots, but they're all going to be about the same swing, hopefully. But you're going to hit 7 shots with your 55-degree wedge, and they're going to be 7 entirely different swing speeds, turf conditions, outcomes. They're going to be entirely different goals for each of those 7 shots with your wedge, whereas each of those 3 shots with your 7-iron, you had exactly the same goal: get it up on or around the green. Those 10 or 12 times you used your driver, you had pretty much the same goal: get it out there and in the fairway. And only the most accomplished players, like, I'm trying to turn the ball over on this hole, but I hit a cut on the last hole. I mean, that's pretty nuanced to golf, and it's fun. But most golfers are just, hey, I want it in the fairway reasonably long, and I want it on the green reasonably close or around the green. But when you have that wedge in your hand, it's time to score. It's time to go on the offense on the golf course now.
Yeah, I know it sounds a little bit anecdotal when you say, 40 grams of difference, but I actually had an experience this past weekend where one of my playing partners, I play like a 125 gram shaft and he plays like an 80 gram shaft. And listen, I know we use golf carts. I was lazy. I was ready to hit my next shot. So I just grabbed his 7-iron out of his bag because my cart was on the other side of the fairway with my playing partner. So I go to swing this golf club and 40 grams of difference, very specifically 40 grams. And the first practice swing, I'm like, oh God, that was different. And then you go and you hit a shot. Unfortunately, I hit a good one, but it's like, as much as that doesn't seem like it would be impactful, it is a significant change going weight to weight. And I do think that's one of the most underthought things for golfers is, number one, what kind of swing are you going to put on it? And number two, what shafts do you use throughout the bag? Because you want to be comfortable first and foremost, especially when you want to hit a touch shot.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, and as we get, our body strength profile changes, and we may get fitted, and typically, I'm looking at the world from 72 years. So I'm looking back at where you are in life. Okay. And I played standard weight dynamic gold, when I was in my 30s and 40s into my 50s. I started realizing, hey, I need to go a little lighter. And I went to lightweight steel and very quickly went to graphite. I've been a huge fan of graphite. I haven't owned a steel shafted golf club for 30 years. Huge fan of graphite. The quality that we have, the performance, playability, and I've had people say, well, graphite isn't stable enough. It's like, well, every player on the PGA Tour swings 120, 130 miles an hour, and they're all playing graphite in their drivers. It obviously is stable enough to stabilize the driver head at 130 miles an hour. It will certainly stabilize your 7-iron at 75 miles an hour. So, that's a non-argument anymore. I mean, the first graphite that came out was pretty dicey, in irons. I mean, there was a lot to be done. But, hey, I don't want to drive a 1975 automobile either. They're a lot better now than they were back then. So, everything continues to improve. And these shaft companies are relentless. They're continuing to improve their products. But a piece of tubular steel, we pretty much maxed out what we can do with that about 40 years ago. And it still surprises me that how many people are stuck on steel shafts that could really see a benefit of graphite in their irons and wedges.
Terry, I have one last question for you today, and it's a question that I bet a lot of folks are asking or hoping. One of the things we see a fair bit of in the wedge game is finish differences, and it seems like you're quite consistent with yours. Have you been experimenting at all? Will we see any change in that anytime soon?
We're always looking at different things, different finishes. There's black, and I mean, there's a lot of different finishes. And, yes, we're always looking at it, from a business perspective. When you add another finish, you just increase the amount of inventory you have to carry. You have to guess now, did I overbuy or underbuy in the new darker finish or this raw, whatever. And there have been some recent studies, this raw thing, you may like it, but it does not add spin. That's been proven. In fact, your grooves are going to wear faster with a raw face than they will with chrome, because chrome is very hard. It's very protective. That's what it's designed to do. So not to give away, any secrets, but we're always looking at it. But, I guess I could be a little bit of a devil's advocate too and say, when you're not changing the club head design to improve performance, then all you have left is different colors and stampings, because you're not doing anything to affect performance. I'll take a little bit of a shot at the industry. I mean, having your initials on a wedge doesn't make it custom and doesn't make it perform better. You might like it, and we haven't gotten into stamping. It's another whole can of worms that we haven't gotten into yet. I'm not saying we won't, but what we're focused on is, how do I make a better mousetrap? How do I make a 54-degree wedge that'll give you consistently better performance than the next guy's 54-degree wedge, or, a 51 or a 47? And that's what drives me every day. How can I continue to improve on performance characteristics that really matter, that's going to put you closer to the hole, make more bogeys, make more pars, make more birdies, whatever whatever your upside goal is. It's like I have a friend I'm working with that she's trying to get into the 90s, and I told her bogeys are great scores. You've hit 2 shots, you're up around the green. That little wedge shot has got to get you on the green for a 2-putt to make a bogey, because 18 of those and you just shot 90 and you've never broken 100. So, bogeys are great scores for some golfers, and pars are great scores for others, and birdies are great scores for everybody. So, watch the U.S. Open this weekend. There's going to be some very strategic bogeys made out there that professional's going to be very happy to leave that hole with a bogey. So, it's not always a bad score, right?
Yeah, I read something that someone said, I forget how they worded it. It's almost better to miss some of the greens there in the right spot than hit the greens in the wrong spot. So it sounds like it'll be fairly diabolical.
Yeah.
But either way, Terry, it's always a blast to have you on. It's such a fun conversation. You look at wedges differently, and you look at it in a way that potentially can support a lot of golfers. So I really appreciate that side of things. Do you have any final thoughts or questions for me before we wrap up today?
You've asked some great questions. It's always fun. The 45 minutes just flew by. It always does. I get very passionate about wedges, and this game is more fun the lower scores you shoot and the more good shots you hit. And that's what drives me. Seeing the reviews that people post on our website, the emails I get from people that, I was skeptical, but wow, these are the real deal. And, it's a business, and the financial guys decide, what success is. But when you can make a change in somebody's wedge game, to me, that's what keeps me going every day. And I'm been doing this a long time, and I wake up every day with passion about how I can do it better. And, we love being part of THP, and your guys, have really been supportive of us. And we just, offer everybody else, like, hey, we'll build you a wedge, ship it to you free. You'd play it for 30 days. And if it's not the real deal, send it back. And, we don't want anybody out there feeling like they got stuck because they bought an Edison wedge and they didn't like it. I don't want any unhappy Edison carriers out there. If you've got one in your bag, you're going to love it enough to put more in your bag. And if it didn't work for you, let us know. We found a lot of times we can well, why did you order that shaft if this is what you're playing in your irons? Or why did you order, standard lie when you're 2 up? Or, it's like we can make a tweak and people go, wow, that made all the difference in the world. And we love working with our golfers. We cherish every owner we have. And, they're our best ambassadors out there.
That's very cool. Well, hey, if you folks are out there listening in, I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Wedges are such a fascinating part of the game. In a lot of ways, they are very intimate in how you operate. So go take a look at Edison wedges, and hey, take the risk-free trial. What do you have to lose? See what those wedges can do for your game. If you do play this weekend, have a great time. Make it count. Make someone laugh out there. People take golf too seriously sometimes. If they do something goofy or you do something goofy, make them laugh. It'll definitely improve the round. Either way, enjoy the U.S. Open. I will see you guys next week.